Okay, great. Okay, I'll if my voice goes down, just sort of wave or something. Yeah. Okay. Good. Okay. Yeah. So thank you very much, Naideepa. That's your very kind introduction, and really lovely to be with you all. Again, it's not my, as some of you know, it's not my first visit or virtual visit anyway to Istanbul. So yeah, really nice to be with you and see you. So Nayadeepa mentioned that I ordained him. That's right. I was on a course in Spain, in Guccialoca. And I was due earlier this year to do another course, actually a 4-month ordination retreat. Now, unfortunately, with everything that's going on and lockdown, that was cancelled. So I was suddenly grounded in London. As Naideepa meant, I tend to travel a lot, or I did before COVID. So I suddenly grounded in London with more time on my hands than is usual. And among other things, I mean, I'm a very keen on growing plants, but I suddenly in lockdown got completely obsessed with African violets. Now, I don't know if you all know what African violets is, but I've got a show and tell just in case. So this guy here is an African violet, just in case you haven't seen them before. So basically they're houseplants. They're very common in Britain. I don't know if you have them in Turkey too. I can imagine that you might well have them. Now prior to this, I pretty much dismissed African violets. I'm afraid I'd rather seen them as plants for old ladies. You know, they're sort of mostly purple or pink. And yeah, I'd very much seen them as sort of old ladies plants that, you know, you might take to an old lady if you were visiting her. However, I had a couple of years before, I'd bought myself a miniature African violet, which was a white one, so not pink or purple, but a white one, which I was quite keen on, but it didn't actually grow very well and it didn't reflower for me. In fact, it nearly died on me. But anyway, in lockdown, I started getting obsessed. I gave them a new look. And what I discovered was there's a huge range of African violets. So there's literally thousands of different varieties. And they come in all sorts. I mean, just to give you a little example, I don't know if you'll be able to see this very easily. So this guy is called fruit cocktail. And as well as being pink, it's also yellow and white. And it's got streaks on. And yeah, you can get all sorts of different varieties. You can get ones that are called fantasy, which have like got speckles in them. And you can get pinwheel ones and yeah, lots of different varieties. So I started getting interested by them and also started more fully appreciating their beauty. The flowers can really have intense colors and they can sort of glisten, particularly in the sunshine. They really glisten. And what I noticed was in terms of my relationship to African violets is that had two tendencies. So one tendency was a kind of greediness. Basically, it's like I looked online for a place that sells African violets, and it was a bit like going into a sweetie shop as a child and seeing all these different sweets and thinking, I want that one and that one and that one and that one. So there was definitely a sort of greedy response of wanting all these different varieties, and then buying more than I had room for, and then I had to get new setups so that I could grow the ones that I'd bought. So there was that tendency, but there was also a tendency of a real joy and delight in appreciating the beauty of them. And also, I did quite a lot of reading to find out, you know, why my little white one hadn't grown very well, and found out why it hadn't, which is basically to do with the light. But then a real satisfaction in the sense of helping the flowers to grow. Now, you might be wondering, what on earth has African violets got to do with, you know, kindness? Last time I mentioned, the reason I had the show and tell is last time I gave a talk and included African violets. I had people looking them up online during the talk, so I thought I'd just, you know, show you them instead. So the reason I mention them is because I'm going to talk tonight about true kindness and false kindness. So true kindness has a number of qualities to it. So first of all, there's a quality of interest and appreciation. So just as I was appreciating the violets, true kindness has this quality of appreciation. Secondly, there's an element of understanding or wisdom. So if you want to grow African violets, you need to learn how to do them. But it's the same with anything that, if we want to really be kind towards a person or an object indeed, we need to have some understanding. We need to have some wisdom about how we do that. And then thirdly, true kindness helps whatever is in the orbit of the kindness to grow. So that might be something that's quite active, or it might be just setting up the conditions. Nayadipa was talking quite a lot about listening, about the quality of listening. So that can be an important element of kindness. So just as in a way, the sun shines on plants and provides warmth and light, it sort of sets up the conditions in which a plant can grow. So in the same way, real kindness has that effect on, well, particularly on beings. It helps beings to grow in the warmth and light of true kindness. So actually, to have all of that, to have a real interest and appreciation, to have real understanding and wisdom, and to have this intention to help the objects of the kindness to grow is actually quite high ideal. And it's very easy for us, for all of those elements not to be there. So what I wanted to have a look at is what happens if all those elements aren't there. So, and in particular, what can happen is that we can end up with what's sometimes referred to as false kindness, which is more, false kindness is more like an idea of what we think kindness might mean, but actually it's not what we really mean, certainly not what we mean in Sri Ratna or the Buddhist tradition. Also, if all those elements are there, we may end up with what are referred to as near enemies. So things that look like kindness, but aren't really kindness. So, so one of the elements that can be lacking is, or that can make a shift away from true kindness, is that we want something in return. So when we're acting with kindness, we want something in return. There's a Pali word for that, which is called pema, or Sanskrit is prema, and that is sometimes translated as sticky affection. So it's sticky affection because there's affection there, but it's not completely clean. It's a bit sticky. Whereas real kindness, you could say, has a disinterested interest. So not an uninterested interest, but a disinterested. It's sort of, it's not If I can act with real kindness, I'm not trying to get something back for myself. Now, having, wanting to some degree, wanting something back is sort of almost inevitable. As I say, it's kind of like a very, very high ideal to have completely disinterested kindness. And, in a lot of particularly our close relationships, inevitably, there's going to be some element of this, of wanting, something back, even if it's just an appreciation of the fact that you have been kind, as it were. But I think it's important to at least be aware of what the ideal is, and also to acknowledge to ourselves, to be really honest with ourselves that, there is something that we want back. Sometimes we don't actually notice until we don't get it back what the thing that we wanted. I've had the example of, giving somebody a present and maybe, I don't know, sending it in the post and then never hearing anything back. So partly I just don't know if they got it or not, which again, in some way shouldn't, well, of course, one wants the person to get the object, to get the present, but part of the reason I want to know they've got it is actually because I want them to say, oh, that was really kind of you. What a nice thing you did. You sent me that, that sort of thing. And so if you don't hear that back, it can be then that you notice the disappointment. So it's very easy for us not to recognize actually that we do want something back from our kindness. So as I say, often it can be in a way quite almost innocent. It's just like, yes, one does want an acknowledgement, one does want something back. But at the worst, of course, it can become more manipulative. So this is an example of a false kindness, is manipulative kindness, where there's really a definite intention. You're trying to get something from the other person. You're trying to manipulate their behavior, and certainly if you're on the receiving end of that, it doesn't feel very nice to be on the receiving end of that if someone's trying to manipulate your behavior. I should throw in a little caveat there that sometimes, depending on our background, we can be a bit suspicious of anybody being kind to us. Some of us have that sort of background where any kindness, you're going, yeah, wait a minute, what's in it for them? And sometimes that might be right, but sometimes that might, just being kind. And of course, one could say the other side of practicing kindness is being able to receive kindness and just to be able to enjoy that and receive it when people are kind to one. A more sort of subtle version of this is when we try and fix people. So that can be quite a temptation. And partly we might want to fix people because we want to have the pleasure of feeling that we've given them some really good advice. I don't know if you notice that situation, that sometimes, like, I've noticed sometimes, like, being ill, and then all the world suddenly comes up with all these marvelous advice, bits of advice about, oh, well, I should take this or do that or have that or something. And maybe actually all you want is a bit of sympathy rather than, lots of, alternative cures, or not even alternative cures, but, go and see the doctor. So we can sometimes get into advice giving because we want to sort of feel important that we're giving advice. It can sort of strengthen our sense of self. Sometimes we can get into advice giving and trying to fix people because we're uncomfortable with their discomfort. It can be quite painful, or well, certainly uncomfortable, being around someone who is in either mental or physical pain. And therefore we can sometimes just want to fix it, to sort of, in a way, clear up the mess and get it sorted out, and in a way not have to deal with it, or at least not have to hang out with it for very long. So yeah, so fixing is another, in a way, sort of false form of kindness, wanting to fix people. And in a way, that last version is related to a couple of the near enemies, which again relate to, particularly if we're with somebody who's suffering. Sometimes what that can evoke in us is fear. And we can feel uncomfortable being around somebody who is suffering. And so we either, one response is that we can just feel overwhelmed by their suffering. You know, for example, if you've ever been with people who are depressed, there's something quite infectious about the quality of depression, in the sense that, you know, you're with somebody who's telling you how bad it is and how there's no hope for the future, and you start yourself feeling, oh yeah, it's really, you know, your own mood starts going down. It has that sort of infectious quality. So what can sometimes happen is we can get into what's called horrified anxiety. So horrified anxiety, kind of what it implies on the tin, it's that you get horrified by the other person's suffering and you feel anxious about it. Partly you can often do because you feel helpless, you don't know what to do in the situation. And then of course it's tempting to go into the trying to fix somebody, which isn't necessarily the best thing to do, as I've already indicated. So one way is to go into horrified anxiety, and particularly when that evokes maybe memories of our own suffering, or even resonates with our own current suffering. It can all then seem like too much to bear. So horrified anxieties, that's one near enemy. The other way of going with this is, instead of getting sort of overwhelmed by it in that way, it's a bit like we try and back off from it. So we try and back off from the other person's suffering, and do what we've referred to in this context as pity. So pity is kind of where you take a sort of a bit of a superior position, and it's a bit like saying, oh, poor you, or sort of never mind. It's sort of patting on the head would be the gesture for that. But in a way, it's sort of, rather than really being alongside them and really being with them in a kind way, it's a kind of a sort of stepping back, a kind of distancing, because you feel uncomfortable being around their suffering. So yeah, so you've got the two ways you can go. You can either get caught up in it and get into horrified anxiety, or you can back away and off from it and get into pity. So those are two of the sort of near enemies, particularly associated with when the other person's suffering. Then I mentioned true kindness has got a quality of understanding or wisdom. So sometimes when we try to be kind, that is lacking. The false kindness version of that is sometimes referred to as stupid kindness. So instead of wise kindness, it's stupid. And the joke version of this relates to a Boy Scout. I don't know, do you have Boy Scouts in Turkey? Yeah, you do. Great. Okay, so you know what a Boy Scout is. So of course Boy Scouts are supposed to do good deeds, and certainly in England, the good deeds that the classic example is to help an old lady across the road, probably especially if she's carrying an African violet. But anyway, so anyway, the joke goes like this: that the Boy Scout is reporting that he's done his good deed from the day, but it was a really, really hard deed. So he feels really pleased with himself because it was a very hard deed to do. So you ask him what the deed was, and he says, well, it was to help an old lady across the road. And you say, yeah, but why was that hard? And he says, oh, well, she didn't want to cross the road. So so that anyway, that's the joke version of stupid kindness, which is, so in a way, what I'm pointing to here is that real kindness actually sees what needs to be done. So it's more than just a sort of swathe of lovingness. It's actually getting to the heart of the matter of what would be really helpful in the situation. If that's not there, then it's not really kind in a way. And you know, in the joke version, obviously, it's completely opposite of that. There's a related one, which again implies a kind of lack of understanding, which is sometimes referred to as weak kindness. So again, it's a false friend. So weak kindness. So the weak kindness is like being a doormat. So it's where you allow people to walk over you, as it were, in the name of kindness. So the sort of views that are associated with that are something like, I must give them whatever they want. So whatever they say they want. So whatever they say they want, I must give them. I mean, I used to, when I was working in addictions, and I mostly worked with people with alcohol problems. And this was an issue that I'd see quite a lot, where you'd have a relationship where one partner's drinking problematically, the other partner's not drinking, the other partner wants to be kind, and the one who's drinking is sort of saying, oh, well, can you get me some more drink? And of course, then there's a dilemma there. But it, you know, if the person doesn't give the person, you know, go out and buy them drink, then of course it can cause conflict in the relationship, and the person who's a non-drinker can sometimes feel like they're being unkind. So again, that's in a way a bit of a stark example of this thing of where it can be unhelpful just to do what the other person says they want, just to give them what they want. But in a way, it can happen on much more subtle levels than that, and particularly where there's this tendency, this sort of view that I have to give people whatever they say they want. It can also be often associated, when it's this unhelpful, weak kindness, it's often associated with a view of I must always put other people before me, even at great cost to myself. So, of course, we might choose to put other people first, and hopefully sometimes we do choose to put other people first. Otherwise, we've just got selfishness, and that's not kindness either. So hopefully sometimes we do choose to put other people first, and sometimes it may even be at a great cost. But hopefully, if we're doing that deliberately, and we're not doing it out of fear, because we're fear of what will happen if we don't act in this way, and we're not doing it out of self-hatred, so out of a lack of kindness towards ourselves. So those of you familiar with the metta bhavana meditation, loving kindness meditation, will of course know that the first stage is ourselves, and then we develop kindness towards other people. So that's, you know, in the sort of whole, as it were, kindness equation, we need to include ourselves in, you know, we are also a being. Of course, the tendency is to be self-centered rather than other regarding. And even in this example that I'm giving here of weak kindness, actually it is a particular kind of self-referentialness, self-referential. It is self-referential, but in a negative way, with a sort of negative self-view rather than a positive self-view. So, yeah, so weak kindness, again, is a false form of kindness. So other elements that might not be present in kindness is that we might not be fully interested or attending. And, you know, a thing that's related to that is very easy to dismiss. So just as I'm afraid, dismissed African violets as plants for old ladies, it's very easy to dismiss other people. Of course, when we meet somebody for the first time, we automatically make judgments within seconds. You know, that's part of our evolutionary heritage. You know, we've needed to be able to make snap decisions about basically, is this a friend or is this a foe? So, you know, we've got that, and we don't need to be ashamed of that in a way. But we do need to acknowledge it, and not, you know, that might be a starting point, but it's not necessarily, hopefully, well, depending what the response is, but hopefully not necessarily the finishing point. So the starting point may well be, you know, for example, we might have a negative response to someone and dismiss them. If we're trying to practice kindness, then what we want to do is be interested in that. Oh, so how come I've got that sort of response? What is going on there? Can I explore that a bit further? Can I see what it is that I'm reacting to in the other person? So often when we react to other people, it's because they remind us of something in ourselves that we don't like, or it's just, you know, simple, you know, prejudice that we've been, you know, sort of brought up with, you know, cultural influences. There can be any number of things, of course. Yeah, so that in a way, when we notice a desire to dismiss or not be interested or not pay attention, that's actually a really good cue to, oh, well, can I get interested in this? What is going on? What is going on here? I remember years ago when I was doing some psychotherapy with a patient, and I noticed my immediate response was a strong revulsion, which quite surprised me, because I don't usually have that kind of response. I mean, I might have a sort of dislike, but not like a real revulsion. And what I found interesting was we talked to it, and we talked, you know, together, and I got to know this guy more. And he talked about how he himself felt repulsive. And it was like somewhere I'd actually felt like I picked that up from him. And it's almost like he was showing me what it is that he felt. And so in being able to explore that together, you know, it felt like we were able to, well, anyway, just sort of go into it more and more fully. But it really helped by me being able to acknowledge what I felt, even though it wasn't anything very positive, but also to be interested in it, to sort of be curious about it and try and explore it more. Okay, so we may find the lack of interest or lack of attention. And then the last area I want to mention in terms of false kindness, or the sort of lack of ingredients of true kindness, is where kindness doesn't result in an action. So I was saying that true kindness, wherever possible, will result in some kind of kindly action. So there are a number of examples of that. So one is this phenomenon that's been talked about in recent years of virtue signaling. So I don't know, I'm getting this Vajrachakshu screwing up his face, so maybe I'll just unpack that, what virtue signaling. So virtue signaling is when you show that, in a way, what it amounts to is appearing to be virtuous by communicating your disapproval of something that everybody's disapproving of around you. So, you know, that can be, you know, whatever the, you know, whatever the, you know, the issue is. So it might be, you know, things to do with gender inequality or racial inequality or any other sort of inequality, for example, as, you know, sort of current examples. And where the thing about virtue signaling is where you're keen to show that you're, as it were, on the right side, as it were, that you're, oh yes, that's a really terrible thing, and, you know, But so you're making the noises, but actually what it's really motivated by is by being part of the group, of getting approval, rather than because there's actually a deep feeling of there's a real injustice here, which is something I would like to do something about. You know, that is when it is the real question is, does it actually result in you doing something about it? Not just in saying, oh yes, that's really terrible. Does it translate into kind action? So another example of this that often, at least, results in lack of action is what I refer to as sentimentality. So sentimentality is where there's lots of emotion, but in a way, the emotion doesn't actually feel like it quite fits with the situation. It's sort of like it's just like a superabundance of emotion, but again, not translating into real action. I mean, just to give you a little example of the sort of thing, what I mean by sentimental is years ago when I was looking on Google for an image to give, I was giving a PowerPoint presentation on kindness. So I put in kindness to see what images came up. And the sort of images that came up were a kitten with a little fluffy chicken. Now, I'm afraid for me, that is pure sentimentality. I mean, you know, very sweet, lovely, 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 but it's not kindness. It's not real kindness at all. It's just sort of like sweet and oh and cool, that sort of thing. It's, you know, if you find yourself making those sorts of noises, unless it's a baby, it's not real kindness. I mean, you know, babies, that's fine, but you know, for another adult, that's probably not you know, an appropriate response, or at least not a real kind response in the way that I mean it. So yeah, sometimes we get sentimentality, and the experience of that, certainly the way I've noticed it, is in a way it's sort of a bit like horrified anxiety, but a more sort of seemingly positive end of that. And again, sort of when I've been on the receiving end of that, it felt a bit like, oh, sticky, and a bit like I'm not really being seen in that sort of sentimental response. Vajrachakshu also wanted me to mention being nice. He put that in his email years ago. I think we could call being nice being, again, an example of, in a sense, sentimentality. Now, just a little caveat on that. Of, you know, there's nothing wrong with good manners and politeness you know, they can be really helpful. They can really help to smooth social interactions, particularly when people don't know each other very well. But I guess the danger is that it stays on that rather superficial level, and at the very worst becomes insincere, where you're just pretending to be nice, but you don't actually really feel it. And it's not like you don't really feel it, but you're trying to do something different. It's just like you're putting on a face of being nice. Sangharakshita, the founder of Triratna, has got this lovely aphorism of honest collision is better than dishonest collusion. Honest collision is better than dishonest collusion. So we can collude with one another by being nice rather than engaging in what might be a difficult conversation in which we might sort of collide with each other because we have different points of view. So again, I guess, you know, the test of, you know, whether it's niceness is just merely just sort of good manners, but it is underlain by real kindness or not, is when you're really in need. So does the kindness continue actually when you're in difficulties? That's in a sense a test. So I spent quite a bit of time on different forms of false kindness. So let's move on to how we actually, or at least some things about cultivating kindness. If I can get my thing to work for me, just a second. Okay. So in terms of cultivating kindness, so first of all, it's really helpful to be aware of all the stuff I've just been talking about, because in a way, the reason I went through all that is because, you know, inevitably there's going to be some of that, you know, at different times, there's going to be different elements of that. So it's really good to be aware of those things so that we can work on moving towards true kindness. But there can be some other views as well that can get in the way of cultivating kindness. So sometimes people have a view that emotions are not things that one can cultivate, in a way that emotions are just things that spontaneously arise. So at least in the Buddhist tradition, it's always said that actually emotions are things that we do. Now, clearly there can be a whole habit of an emotions. Emotions can have strong habits, so that it's very difficult, sometimes be very difficult to change an emotion because there's such a strong habit force behind it. But nevertheless, from a Buddhist point of view, it's something we do. So, for example, sometimes, unfortunately, at least some of us, nurse hatred. So we actually cultivate hatred. So a sort of little example of that is just when something bad's happened to you, or somebody has been a bit unpleasant to you, and then you start rehearsing in your mind all the reasons why that's a bad person, all the bad things they've done, all the, you know, terrible things they've done to you over the past, that they've done to other people. That is called nursing hatred. And I'm afraid it doesn't have a good outcome. It doesn't lead to happiness. So that is cultivation of hatred. And it's unfortunately very easy to get into doing that. But equally, we can cultivate love. We can cultivate kindness. And of course, that's what we try and do in the Metta Bhavana meditation. But it's worth really noting that it's something that we can do deliberately. And primarily we do that by giving our attention to that, by wanting to do that, having an intention to want to have more kindness in our lives. I'm kind of assuming that you're listening to this talk because you think that having more kindness in your life is a good thing. I hope so. Or maybe you're just being very perverse, but hopefully, hopefully that isn't the case. Hopefully you just, you're with me on that and want more kindness in your life. Certainly the world could do with plenty more of it. So yes, so it is something that we can do deliberately. The other view though, but the view can be that it's not something that one can do, but also a related view can be that I can't do it. So maybe people can do it, but I can't do it. And what I would say is that even when we're feeling that we can't cultivate kindness as an emotional state, we can still act with kindness. Years ago, when I was on my ordination course back in 1990, one of the things we got into, particularly when we were feeling in a bad mood, was to make somebody else, or offer to make somebody else a cup of tea. So a very ordinary, straightforward thing that I'm sure we've all done at times. But actually just to deliberately do it, particularly when not feeling in a good state. And always what I would find is it would have a good effect. So not only, hopefully, the person would or wouldn't want a cup of tea, and hopefully they appreciated it when they did want it and received it, but also it changed my own mental state. This was for me, much earlier actually, even before I was a Buddhist. It was my first sort of proto-Buddhist insight, which was the fact that you can change your mental states. And the way I learned this as a child was to do with Christmas. So in Christmas in Britain, well, particularly, growing up as a child in England, the most exciting thing was getting presents, receiving presents. Now, in my own household, we weren't allowed to have presents until after the Christmas lunch. And my mum was always late with things. Actually, very, very kind woman. I mean, partly she was so kind, she'd stop and do things instead of getting on with what needed to get done. But so it'd be lunch would be really, really late, sort of more like, I don't know, 3 or even 4 in the afternoon, which in England is very, very unusual. I mean, in England, my friends would be having lunch at 12:30. So this is like 4 o'clock. So you wouldn't get on to seeing your presents until about 6 in the evening, which as a 10-year-old child was like a complete torment. You've been looking forward to this day for ages, and then you had to wait and wait and wait. So one of the things I learned is one year I decided, because I knew this was the scenario, so I took myself off for a walk. I mean, I was brought up in the countryside, and I took myself off for a walk in the countryside and came back just feeling really content and happy. And I just realized that what I'd done is done something that actually changed my mental state. I mean, I didn't quite have those words for it, but I learned the principle. And yeah, that was very helpful for me to see that was something I could do. So, we have this saying in Buddhism that we're responsible for our mental states. What that means is that we can always do so. In principle, we can always do something about our minds, our mental states. We can always change them. We can always change them for the better. We can always become kinder, more loving, if we put in the effort, if we put in the time and effort. Okay. So those are a couple of views we need to watch out for. Either a belief that emotions are just spontaneous, or a belief that I can't change my mind, I can't cultivate kindness. So the last part I wanted to just look at was really some tips for cultivating kindness. So the first one I've mentioned already, which is just act with kindness, like the making a cup of tea on my ordination retreat. Next one is don't expect perfection. So what I mean by that is kindness is a practice. In a way, it's more of a direction rather than something that you can, it's not like getting married where you can do it and then it's done, as it were. And you can tick it off the box off your life list. I've got married now, tick. It's more like a relationship, which is, there's always more to do. There's always further to go. Next tip is take time to appreciate. So appreciation, as I mentioned, is a really important element of kindness. So, I like to take time to look at my African violets. But one of the things that's quite nice to do is take time to reflect on other people's positive qualities. So we have this practice in Buddhism called rejoicing in merits. And so I live in a community with 9 other guys who, in fact, it's our community evening this evening. And what we like to do, we celebrate our birthdays. So when we celebrate our birthdays, after a really nice meal and giving presents, we rejoice in merit. So we rejoice in the person whose birthday it is, and we rejoice in their good qualities. And it's just such a lovely thing to do. It's actually, even if you're not a Buddhist, it's a lovely thing to do. When my niece got married, she asked me, because she'd heard about what we do on my birthdays at home, and she said, "Oh, could you do that thing where you say nice things about people?" So I said, yeah, sure. So it was really nice. So I was able to rejoice in her and her husband at their wedding, which was just such a nice thing to do. And rather than I don't know whether this happens in Turkey, but sometimes the best man speeches in England, at least, can be just a way of saying horrible things about the groom. It was just very nice to rejoice in their merits, and yeah, people really like that. So another aspect of taking time to appreciate is gratitude. So allowing ourselves to feel grateful. It's a lovely quality to just feel grateful for the things that we have received. It's just, yeah, just very, very nice way of, well, there's a foundation for kindness. It can be a very good way of, if we're doing the kindness meditation, the metta bhavana, a really good way in is to pay attention to the things that we appreciate in our lives, which can be all sorts of things. It can be just a simple thing like, somebody smiled at me in the cafe, or it could be about important people in our lives, or it could be just seeing the sunshine on a wall, or any number of things we can appreciate. So yes, gratitude. Another tip is remembering that you're going to die. A nice cheery one. So I mention that because remembering our death can be a very good way of bringing perspective to our lives. It can really help us to focus on what is important. There's a nice book called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying, I think it is. by a palliative care nurse in Australia. And she interviewed these people, or based it on her experience of mostly working with Australian guys, I think, who were dying. And there were a whole set of common regrets. And typically they included things like not spending enough time with friends and family, and letting friendships go, and spending too much time at work. So again, it's sort of ignoring the human element, or not giving enough time to the human element. So rather than wait till we've got a terminal illness and we wind up in a hospice, much better to reflect on the fact that we're going to die, not in a sort of horrified way, but it can be a really good spur to help us focus on what is important in our lives. As the Dhammapada says, thank you, Vajrachakshu, the Dhammapada says, people forget that they're going to die. Those who remember end their quarrels. So if we remember that we're going to die, we will let go of our quarrels, we'll compose our quarrels. Okay, another tip is try and understand, seek to understand. Again, this is really about the wisdom element. There's a book which I quite like by Stephen Covey called The 7 Habits of the Highly Effective Person. And one of those habits is seek first to understand. But basically a lot of disagreement comes out of not understanding each other. So if we try first to understand the other person, we have a much better chance that we'll have a kind response to them. And hopefully that can clear misunderstandings and create positive relationships between us. And related to that, I should say, really don't underestimate the importance of just attending. Nayadeepa was talking about listening. I think at the beginning, you know, I think it is an important thing to have a space and to practice the ability just to listen without rushing into fix. Again, something that I learned years ago when I was a trainee psychiatrist. I was asked to see in casualty a guy who was suicidal, who'd cut himself. And he was just telling me he wanted to die. I was thinking, gosh, I better get this guy into hospital. He didn't want to come into hospital. I felt I didn't know what to do. Well, I didn't really want to get other people, more seniors in to do a compulsory order on him, which would have been one option. But after a while, I gave up I was trying to persuade him to just voluntarily come into hospital. But after a while, I gave up trying and I actually just listened to him. And then I said to him, well, look, you need to get sewn up. I'll come back and see you later. So I came back to see him later. And well, he'd now changed his mind and he was willing to go into hospital, which I was tremendously relieved by. But he thanked me for my help. And I was like, but I haven't helped you. I've done nothing. All I've done is sat and listened to you, actually. And then, it just became clear that that is actually what he needed at that point in time, was just to somebody, just to really say how painful it was. It was a girlfriend who he was devoted to had left him, and he thought that, it was the end of his life, as it were. So yeah, just to be able to attend in that way without trying to fix can be a real gift of kindness. Okay, and then the last tip is just don't take it all too seriously. Play. So, it's good to just play in meditation. It's good to just sometimes follow our impulses. You know, there's this idea, isn't it, of random acts of kindness. There's even a website actually on random acts of kindness. So sometimes we just get the impulse, let's just do it, you know, just, but I think, you know, if we have the whole idea of cultivating kindness as something that's playful, rather than something that's serious in a heavy way. In a certain point of view, it is serious, it's important, but not in a sort of heavy, frowning sort of way. You know, like if we sit on our meditation cushion and we're going to feel kindness in a, you know, that sort of way, that's not going to be helpful. We want a much lighter, more playful attitude. So finally, I just wanted to finish off by just mentioning, in a way, just in terms of thinking about kindness, we can think of 3 levels. So the first level is kindness to other people, which is mainly what I've been talking about. The second level is kindness to all phenomena. So that, in a way, does include people. It also includes objects like violets. But it includes just any kind of experience that we're in contact with. So it includes the weather, includes pain and illness, anything that we hear, see, feel, touch. In principle, we can have a response of kindness to it. And then the highest level is sometimes what's referred to as objectless kindness. So it's kindness that doesn't really have an object. It's just a sort of, in a way, a natural state of being in which there's no clinging to any sense of oneself or other, whether that's an object or a being. It's a sort of a natural, completely free state of consciousness. And that, of course, is a very, very high level of kindness. You know, that is the highest kindness of all, which in a way is synonymous with enlightenment. And as Sangharakshita puts it, I'll just finish with a little something from Sangharakshita's book, Living with Kindness. He says, the way of metta, so the way of loving kindness, is not only a path of ever increasing positive emotion leading to enlightenment, it is a guide to recovering our basic human inheritance of joy. So I really like that. So it's also a guide to our recovering our basic human inheritance of joy. Okay.